Sometimes the weight you carry, the silence you walk through, and the pain you hide isn't because you're forgotten. It's because you're chosen. See, we live in a world that celebrates the spotlight but often forgets the shaping happens in the shadows. The ones God chooses, He breaks, He isolates, not to destroy them, but to build them in places where no one else can reach. Sometimes when you find yourself walking alone, feeling like you've been set aside or forgotten, it's easy to believe that God has abandoned you or that you're being punished. The silence can be deafening and the loneliness can feel unbearable. But that's a lie the enemy wants you to believe. The truth is, when God isolates His chosen ones, it's never to reject or punish them. Instead, it is a divine act of preparation. It is in the quiet, in the solitude, that God does some of His most important work. Think about it. God doesn't call us into His purposes with fanfare and applause right away. He doesn't elevate us in the midst of distractions, noise, and chaos. No, God often begins His work in the stillness, in the places where no one else is watching and where we feel most vulnerable. This isolation is not a sign of failure, but a sign of favor. It's a sacred space where God can shape us without interruption. Isolation strips away the distractions of the world. When you are surrounded by noise, whether it's people's opinions, the busyness of life, or the constant pull of social media, it's hard to hear the still small voice of God. But when those distractions fade away, when the crowd disappears and the noise stops, suddenly you find yourself face to face with God in a way you never have before. And that is the beginning of true transformation. God uses isolation to teach us how to depend on Him fully. When you're surrounded by people, it's easy to rely on their strength, their wisdom, and their approval. But in isolation, you have no choice but to lean on God alone. This dependence is exactly what God desires from His chosen ones. He wants you to come to the place where your confidence isn't built on human support, but on His unchanging promises. When you learn to stand alone with God, you develop a spiritual strength that can't be shaken. Isolation also provides the opportunity for deep introspection and spiritual growth. In the busyness of everyday life, we often move from one task to the next without stopping to examine our hearts. But when God sets you apart, He is inviting you to look inward, to confront your fears, your doubts, and your weaknesses. This process can be painful because it forces you to deal with the parts of yourself you might prefer to ignore. Yet, it is through this honesty with God that true healing begins. He wants to break off anything in your life that hinders you from walking fully in His purpose. Another reason God isolates His chosen ones is to protect them. Sometimes isolation is a shield, a way to keep you from harm, whether that harm comes from people, circumstances, or spiritual attacks. When you're separated, you're less exposed to negative influences that could derail your destiny. In this sacred solitude, God can guard your heart and mind, giving you clarity and peace even in the midst of uncertainty. Furthermore, isolation cultivates humility. When you are alone and stripped of the applause and recognition of others, you come face to face with your true self. Pride is exposed and you learn to surrender control. This humility is essential for anyone God has chosen because He cannot entrust great responsibility to a proud heart. God wants vessels that are empty of self-reliance and full of His Spirit. Isolation humbles you and prepares you to receive His power and wisdom. It's important to understand that isolation isn't always about physical solitude. Sometimes it's emotional or spiritual. You may feel disconnected from others, misunderstood, or even rejected by those closest to you. This emotional loneliness can be just as painful, but it serves the same purpose: to refine your character and sharpen your faith. When you feel alone, God is often working behind the scenes, positioning you for something greater. Many of the great men and women of faith experience this kind of isolation. They walk through seasons of loneliness, often misunderstood and overlooked. But it was in those times that their faith was tested and strengthened. Their isolation was the soil from which their purpose sprang forth. You too are being planted in fertile ground, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. But when you find yourself in a season of isolation, don't despair or question God's love for you. Instead, embrace it as a necessary part of your journey. Understand that God is not punishing you, but preparing you. He is shaping you into the person He called you to be. He is removing distractions, building your dependence on Him, protecting you from harm, humbling your heart, and refining your spirit. This preparation is not easy. It requires patience, faith, and a willingness to surrender. But the result is worth every moment of loneliness and every tear shed in the silence. When God brings you out of isolation, you will emerge stronger, wiser, and more equipped than ever before to fulfill your destiny. Remember, isolation is not the absence of God. It is His divine appointment to draw you closer, to mold you more deeply, and to prepare you for the incredible purpose He has planned. Your loneliness is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your transformation. When God chooses a person for a special purpose, it often means that the person will go through brokenness. This brokenness is not a sign that God has rejected you or that He is done with you. On the contrary, brokenness is one of the most powerful tools God uses to build His people into vessels fit for His use. It is through brokenness that pride is shattered, humility is birthed, and the heart is softened to receive God's fullness. Brokenness is the divine workshop where God reshapes what was once whole but flawed and makes it ready for the extraordinary. Many people fear brokenness because it feels painful and messy. It can come in many forms: rejection, failure, loss, betrayal, disappointment, or deep internal struggle. These moments make you feel like you are falling apart, like the pieces of your life are scattered and can never be put back together. But God sees brokenness differently. To Him, brokenness is the starting point of a new creation. It's the beginning of a transformation that will bring glory to His name. When you think about how God works in the lives of His chosen ones, you realize that brokenness is often the first step in their journey to greatness. The Bible is full of stories of people who were broken before they were made whole. Think about Joseph. He was betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and imprisoned unjustly. He was broken by the cruelty of life, yet God used those very broken pieces to elevate him to a place of influence and power where he could save nations. Brokenness humbles the heart. It strips away the illusion of self-sufficiency and forces you to recognize your need for God. When you are broken, you can no longer rely on your own strength or wisdom. You are pushed to the end of yourself and compelled to reach out to God for help. This humility is essential because God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. The breaking process breaks down the barriers that keep God's power from flowing freely through your life. In brokenness, you learn valuable lessons about perseverance, faith, and trust. You discover depths of strength you didn't know you had. You realize that even when circumstances seem hopeless, God is still at work. Brokenness builds character. It teaches you how to hold on when everything around you is falling apart. It teaches you how to find peace in the storm and hope in the darkest moments. Brokenness also softens the heart, making it more compassionate and empathetic toward others. When you have experienced deep pain, you are more able to comfort and minister to those who are hurting. Your brokenness becomes a bridge that connects you to people in their suffering. God often uses broken vessels to carry his comfort to a broken world. Your scars become part of your testimony, a powerful witness to God's healing and grace. It's important to remember that God doesn't break you to leave you shattered. He breaks you to rebuild you. He doesn't abandon the pieces. He gathers them carefully and fashions them into something new and beautiful. Just like a potter with clay, God molds and shapes the broken parts of your life into a vessel of honor. This process takes time and it requires patience, but God's timing is perfect. And he is always working behind the scenes. Brokenness creates a hunger for God that nothing else can satisfy. When the things of this world fail you, when your plans fall apart and your dreams are dashed, you realize that only God is unshakable. Brokenness leads to dependence on God alone. It draws you into a deeper relationship with him, where you learn to trust his heart and his purposes even when you don't understand what he is doing. Another reason God allows brokenness is to prepare you for greater responsibility. You cannot carry the weight of God's calling with a proud, self-reliant heart. God needs vessels that are humble, teachable, and willing to be led by his Spirit. Brokenness opens the door for God to pour his wisdom, his power, and his grace into your life. It breaks the old so the new can take root. Think about the example of Jesus. Before he began his public ministry, he was broken in the wilderness, tempted, hungry, and isolated. Though he was the Son of God, he endured suffering and rejection. This brokenness prepared him for the cross and for the ultimate act of redemption. Jesus' brokenness was not the end, but the beginning of the greatest work ever done for mankind. You may be going through a season of brokenness right now. It may feel like everything is falling apart, and you wonder if you will ever be whole again. But God is at work in your brokenness. He is breaking what needs to be broken so that he can build what needs to be built. He is pruning your life, cutting away what hinders so that you can bear more fruit. Brokenness is the soil in which new life grows. It's the place where God's power is made perfect in weakness. When you are broken, God's glory shines brightest through you. Your weaknesses become your strengths because they force you to rely on his strength. So don't fear brokenness. Don't run from it or resist it. Embrace it as a necessary part of God's refining process. Let God break you so he can build you. Trust him to turn your pain into purpose and your brokenness into beauty. Your brokenness is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of a new chapter written by the hand of the Creator. And when God finishes his work in you, you will stand stronger, wiser, and more powerful than ever before. Throughout history, there has been a consistent pattern in the lives of those whom God has chosen. Before elevation comes the wilderness. It is no coincidence that some of the greatest figures of faith experience seasons of hardship, loneliness, and testing before stepping into their God-ordained destinies. The wilderness is not merely a physical place, but a spiritual journey, a season marked by challenges that prepare, refine, and position the chosen ones for what lies ahead. When God calls someone, he rarely lifts them to prominence without first taking them through a time of testing and preparation. This time in the wilderness serves a crucial purpose. It strips away the superficial, exposes hidden weaknesses, and strengthens faith in ways that comfort and ease never could. The wilderness is God's classroom where lessons in obedience, endurance, and trust are taught through experience. Consider Moses, one of the most prominent leaders in Scripture. Before God appointed him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness, tending sheep. He went from a prince in Pharaoh's palace to a humble shepherd in the desert. That wilderness was a time of preparation. It shaped his character, refined his leadership, and deepened his dependence on God. It was in the desert that Moses learned to listen for God's voice, a skill he would need in abundance when confronting Pharaoh and leading an entire nation. David, the man after God's own heart, also experienced wilderness seasons. Before he was crowned king, David spent years running from Saul, hiding in caves, living as a fugitive. These years were dark, lonely, and dangerous, but they were necessary. In the wilderness, David learned humility, patience, and courage. He composed many of the Psalms during this time, songs born out of pain, trust, and hope. The wilderness was the proving ground for the king he would become. Joseph's life is another example. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned, Joseph's wilderness was one of suffering and rejection. Yet it was through these trials that God was preparing Joseph for a destiny greater than he could have imagined. From the prison, Joseph rose to become second in command in Egypt, a position from which he saved countless lives during famine. The wilderness season was not a detour, but a necessary path to elevation. The wilderness is where God teaches us to depend on him alone. When everything familiar is stripped away, security, relationships, comfort, we have no choice but to cling to God. This dependence cultivates faith, faith that trusts God's promises even when circumstances seem hopeless. The wilderness exposes the limitations of human strength and reveals the limitless power of God. In the wilderness, we learn obedience. It's easy to follow God when life is smooth and blessings are evident. But the wilderness demands obedience without immediate reward or understanding. It's walking by faith and not by sight. God tests our willingness to trust Him when the path is unclear and the outcome uncertain. The wilderness challenges us to remain faithful even when it seems like God is silent or distant. Endurance is another fruit of the wilderness experience. The long seasons of waiting and testing build resilience. They toughen the spirit and prepare the heart for future challenges. Without the endurance developed in the wilderness, the pressure of leadership and responsibility could become overwhelming. The wilderness hardens our resolve and strengthens our perseverance spiritually. The wilderness is a place of deep encounter with God. It's where we learn to hear His voice more clearly, away from the distractions of life. The solitude and quiet create space for prayer, reflection, and revelation. Many breakthroughs come in the wilderness, moments of clarity, vision, and divine instruction. God uses this time to prepare the chosen ones to lead with wisdom and power. The wilderness is not a punishment or a sign of failure. It is an integral part of God's process for elevating His people. It is a season that teaches lessons no other experience can teach. The struggles and trials are the training ground for the triumphs to come. Understanding the wilderness pattern helps us embrace our own difficult seasons. When we find ourselves isolated, tested, or walking through hardship, we can be assured that God is at work, shaping us for something greater. We can endure with hope, knowing that the wilderness is temporary and that God's promise of elevation is sure. The wilderness experience also builds empathy and compassion. Those who have walked through deep trials are often best equipped to minister to others in their pain. The wilderness creates leaders who are not only strong but also compassionate, able to relate to the struggles of those they serve.